Welcome to this episode of Office Hours podcast series with Vanderbilt Divinity School, where we go behind the scenes with our professors who are teaching lifelong learning courses to find out more about their own scholarly journeys and their interest in the topic of their course. Dr. Forrest Harris is joining us today. He is the professor of the practice of ministry and the director of the Kelly Miller Smith Institute for Black Church Studies. Dr. Harris, it's a pleasure to be with you today.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Now, Dr. Harris, my first question for you before we get into the course you're teaching is this. Without using your title or the word professor, what do you do?
Nathan, basically, I'm a human being trying to live the best life that honors love and God, my children, and my community. I try to do that daily as I grow into a sense of meaning and purpose, and just try to be available to myself and available to the people around me in a real, authentic way.
Well, I can attest to that as your neighbor down the hall,
Okay.
and we're grateful that you're doing it. Dr. Harris, you're teaching a course. You just launched a course, an asynchronous online lifelong learning course, The Social Role of Religion, Leadership and Moral Imagination for Our Times. So let me ask the first question, which is the social role of religion as opposed to or compared to, would it be an individual role of religion or a personal role? Help us understand the difference.
Well, there may not be distinctions or differences other than overlapping the meaning of religion, which in its Latin roots, the word religion really means tying things together. And religion seeks to tie purpose, meaning, and truth to the life we live in a way that there is no gap between our religious practices or religious practice and behavior. So religion, rather than a pietistic and private recum, though it is personal, but it's also public, and it has a social role in that it requires us to show forth what our faith perspectives are, our religious commitments are in social ways, whether that is in family unit, whether that is in community existence, or the political ramifications of our being involved in community with people. So religion has a social role that is tied to what it is that our own personal lives embrace. So that's what I mean by the social role of religion, that it impacts not only us as persons individually, but it impacts the social realities and relationships in which we live our lives.
So what I hear you saying is they're perhaps extensions one of the other. Is that accurate?
Right.
That they complement one another, maybe, rather than.
That's a way to cast it.
Yeah.
Sometimes religion has said to people that my religion is my religion. My belief system is my belief system, without thinking clearly about that belief system and how it impacts the social realities around us and the people in our communities in our world. So if my religion is my religion, it has to be interactive and responsible to the social realities and relationships that we care about. Therefore, religion has a social role.
And Dr. Harris, in your course, you begin or you ground your lectures with the tenet that the social role of religion begins by leaders seeing rightly. So in our current context where we're siloed, where we have what seems like an endless amount of information and data and news, what does it look like for a religious or a faith leader to see rightly in 2026?
Very important point you are driving me to address, Nathan. Seeing rightly in terms of moral clarity, seeing rightly in terms of harm or healing in terms of our world, seeing rightly in terms of what and how love demands that we honor the best of our humanity and all of its diversity. That's what I mean by seeing rightly. And in this current period in which we live, there is much disinformation, misinformation, bad information that puts blinders or keep people from seeing rightly because they have not had the right lens on through which they see themselves and others. And that can certainly be a part of Christianity or any religion that does not help people see appropriately the world as it is shaped or should be shaped by love in relationship to justice and justice in relationship to love. And from my perspective and the way I approach this course in terms of moral imagination and leadership for our times is to see rightly as it relates to the love ethic that we see in the Bible as it relates to Jesus's life and the love ethic as we see it demonstrated in the lives of people and prophets in the Old Testament and the lives of people in our most modern time, Dorothy Day, Martin Luther King Jr., Mother Teresa, and others. So seeing rightly is about vision, is about clarity, moral imagination that ties together love, justice for social transformation.
Well, you touched on a few points there that I want to follow up on. In one of your lectures, you discussed the connection between empires and individual salvation. What are we missing when we view the gospel as primarily an individual moment, as you say, rather than a social movement?
Very, very, very clear point that you're making about one of the things I say in the lecture is that part of not seeing rightly is how the history of empire and the way in which empire has shaped and attempted to define our reality presents a challenge to us because the empire, and when we mention the word empire, we're talking about ancient empires, we're talking about current empire as it relates to our current American understanding of itself. It's essentialism. How that empire, that reality, seeks to define who we are in community, define what democracy looks like for some, and distort its reality for others. So that if I have a kind of spirituality or conversion or commitment to the love ethic of Jesus, it's just not one moment of conversion or one moment of spiritual transformation. It is an ongoing, continuous way in which I live in the world against the very things that empire in its definitions, and sometimes as empire seeks to co-opt religion, co-opt Christianity to perpetuate its advantages, its power. And we see that going on pretty much in our current situation where Christian nationalism has sought to define what Christianity means in light of empire, in light of government, in light of arrangements that exclude or require people to comply with a definition of what it means to be Christian or religious, that we must certainly challenge as it relates to this ethic that I referred to as the love ethic of Jesus, wherein Jesus demonstrates how love stands in the midst of empire with an alternative to the empire's definition politically and socially, and how it challenges us to never be co-opted by the power of empire, but to see that religion and the power of love within a religion, within justice, is a movement. It's not a stationary one-time event in one's personal life.
Yeah, and Dr. Harris, as a scholar of Howard Thurman, let's talk about him for a few minutes because I know he's central to your course, his work. And can you talk about how Thurman views liberation and how that connects to our social sense of religion?
Yes, Howard Thurman, wonderful religious mystic of his day and time, and people are reading Howard Thurman today because Thurman's message has been so powerful to transcend his own time and how it speaks to us today. He was a social mystic. Social mysticism is the best way to tie him into his understanding of liberation. And what I think he meant by social mysticism or liberation is first the liberation of the self, the inward consciousness from all the distortions of that self. The self, the inner self, has been challenged with distortions and misrepresentations, internalization of ways that the self cannot flourish. So the first part of his sense of liberation in terms of the inward journey, as he would call it, is to liberate the self from distortions of the self and go deep down into the inner structure as far as we can go ontologically to affirm a self that's created in the image of God, to be able to call oneself a child of God with no ambiguity and no need for external validation. That deep particularity of faith is what Thurman would call us to, as he would say, as we listen for the sound of the genuine within us. But then the other side of liberation, that's social and must be attended to, is be aware of and name the systems that seek to condemn the self. The systems, the political arrangements, the social altars, the capitalism, the greed, all of the things that would make one be co-opted into an understanding of the self, that in order to succeed, you have to play the game of external validation through success and through all the profit making and all the things that become more important than embracing the truth of the self. So one, distortions of the self, liberation. And then on the other side, the systems that condemn the self. You bring those two together and you got what Thurman would be calling a social mystic, trying to understand the depth and truth of oneself in alignment with God's purpose in the world, not just for oneself, but for all creation.
Thank you for that answer, because Dr. Harris, you really set me up for my next question. You did me a favor there. So in part of your course, you also you talk about the Black church experience, and that the Black church is uniquely equipped to speak prophetically to those systems. And I want to read just one of what you wrote on one of your slides for the course. The Black church embodies this divine human moment, from hush harbors to storefront sanctuaries, from slave spirituals to freedom songs. Liberation was not merely preached, it was practiced. Liberation was sung before it was legislated. In the civil rights movement, pastors and lay people did not see activism as separate from spirituality. Prayer meetings birthed boycotts, sermons ignited marches. It was not accidental. It was Luke 4 embodied. So can you talk more about how the Black church in this moment embodies the divine human movement?
Yes, the Black church, or the Black church Christian tradition of liberation and justice. Because if you think back to its roots, Black churches were birthed on American soil because of a system of empire, because of a system of injustice, because of the gap between their humanity and the way in which their humanities were diminished, even within Christianity or white Christianity or the church. So out of that tradition and out of its origins of being birthed on American soil, to seek and to pursue a full sense of freedom and humanity that was not split and not divided based on race and culture, but holistically as people born for freedom and to pursue freedom. The Black church continues to be a presence in the midst of our current moment that raises that vision to even its needed visibility. And what I mean by that is the Black church, if it represents its history and its witness in this country, would be a voice for justice and love in the way in which these systems that we are encountering today, and the repression and suppression of persons' humanity based upon their differences, or the oppression of people because of their social location and or their lives that have been shaped by the proximity of poverty to crime. All these systems, all these public policies that denigrate persons' humanity. The Black church stands in the midst of it, calling forth for justice, as Amos would say, to roll down like water, and righteousness as an ever-flowing stream. Now, Black churches themselves, some of them have been co-opted by the empire's definitions and the empire's policies, supporting a kind of understanding of government and governance that is against the grain of the very liberation tradition that produced them. And so I'm anxious always to confront Black churches as well as other churches to reclaim a prophetic understanding, a liberative understanding of love and justice in the world as it represents God's purpose for all creation. And in the time that we're living in now, Nathan, wherein you have a real challenge of people co-opting and weaponizing religion for the purposes of the empire, for the purpose of some kind of patriotic loyalty to what and how people understand the freedoms that we all should have. But as we can see with evidence, those very policies and very approaches is oppressive to segments of our population and continues to be a challenge to what democracy can mean for us all. So the Black church has a history of representing that vision, but yet we have to challenge it as well as other churches to maintain that vision in a way that is no complicit with the way in which we see this culture carrying us.
Yeah. Well, you've spent your career as what I've heard described before as hyphenated leadership. You minister, administrator, professor, president. That's taken you into so many different contexts, and that you've likely forgotten more than I've ever learned at this point. So let me ask you this question then about the times we're in and what leadership looks like. I think for many of us, it feels like unprecedented times to be a person of faith in America, or to be, as a person of faith, to be a leader and have a moral imagination. As you reflect over, 50 years, tell me, does this feel unprecedented to you? And if not, what are some of the common themes that you've seen over the years?
Well, Nathan, what we see today in the Black church and the Black religious experience and the struggle over history and over time for the full sense of God's love and humanity that embraces that love, what we see today is not new to us. We've seen the horrific challenges of what's going on today before. There's no way that you can look into the archives of the faith that has held Black people together. My parents, my grandparents, the Black church that I grew up in. There's no way we can look into the archives of that history and not see the horrific suffering, the lynching trees, the discrimination, the Jim Crow culture, the police brutality, the George Floyds and the Michael Browns and Trayvon Martins, Breonna Taylor, all of those incidents and the litany of those kind of modern day sufferings and tragedies continue in quiet places that we never know of in our communities. So unprecedented, no, but what's new is how we have become almost but fatalistic in accepting what has become the norm, or our religion and our fervor and strength and energy to challenge it seemingly is fragmented around classism, political ideologies, materialism, and securities that some think they have over against others. And it's a challenge because the solidarity around what needs to be affirmed by the church and all of us is a beloved community, as Dr. King would challenge us, the kind of non-violent ethic that James Lawson would affirm for us in terms of civil disobedience against laws that are not just, the way in which we seek to be charitable over and against being agents and advocates for justice change. That is where I think the moment calls for moral imagination and leadership. We depend so heavily on electoral politics and voting people into the seats of government, which is important. But I think, Nathan, that politics that are not defined by the compassion and ethic of love and justice and is always siloed into a decision about a politician doing this or that for his constituency, no matter how it affects others, the suppression of votes, of voting, as we are having this talk today, the conversation in the Supreme Court, challenging the 1965 Voters' Rights Act, gains that we thought we've made and should be permanent as it relates to how we understand our civic responsibilities and our power to vote as a communal group. All of that is being challenged in different ways that we did not think we would have to revisit so soon after Dr. King, after James Lawson, after all the suffering and all the struggles that the country has gone through to get us to this point. We didn't think that there would be a period that would return to carry us back. And that is what may be unprecedented, but it's certainly not new.
And my question to follow up on that is a bit of a personal one, Dr. Harris, which is after at this point in your career, where does that passion come from to still want to speak prophetically or to still feel compelled to speak prophetically when it would be easy for you to hang it up, right? Or mail it in?
Well, I at this stage of my life, more so than just career, because I always saw my life after I was in government for about 10 years as a compliance officer for the Injury Research and Development Administration in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, requiring government contractors to comply with government laws as it relates to equal employment opportunity. And by the way, back then, at one place in Arkansas, Timex Corporation, I was able to negotiate with Timex a $1.3 million remedy for women who were doing work similar to men but not being paid. As I think about that, back then I was just a young guy out of college beginning a job. But the Black church, parents, and the spirituality of the church gave me a sense of call. And that calling now, after all these years, being a president of American Baptist College, where C.T. Vivian, John Lewis, and James Lawson themselves, James Lawson was a teacher of them in terms of nonviolence, Bernard Lafayette. I was privileged to be there as president, but I saw that as a part of a calling. Coming to Vanderbilt as a student, but then later doing the degrees for master's and doctoral degrees here, I saw that as a calling. And who would have thought that I would end up back at Vanderbilt and at ABC, here at Vanderbilt as professor of the practice of ministry and director of the Keller Mills Smith Institute on Black Church Studies. All of that, Nathan, I see as a part of God's calling. And as it unfolded, thank God I was available in a way that God could use my life to perpetuate this kind of work. And I'm still passionate very much about it because it's larger than me. It was larger than Martin Luther King. It is larger than any of the persons who have given so much of their life, ultimate sacrifice of their life for it. And it moves on beyond us and transcends us into movements for generations to come, because God's beloved community, God's vision for life and creation is a continuous call that we hand on to others as we move off the scene. And I don't want to move off the scene physically. I'm not looking for immortality. As I move off the scene physically, maybe, or retire from ABC, I still teach here at Vanderbilt, of course, but it's a kind of rewirement rather than retirement. It's a kind of energy. And the more you see its diminishment in the public square, the more your passion gets stirred like a fire shut up in your bones that you cannot quench. So that's how I would answer that question in terms of how do you get the passion and energy. Love is a fire. Love is a passion. Love is a courageous stance for the justice that we want to see in God's world. And it never dies. It is a fire. It is a light in darkness that darkness cannot overcome.
As you think about what you want for your students who would take your lifelong learning course, what do you want them to walk away with as they encounter your teaching?
Well, Nathan, I hope they come with a hunger. So as they come into the lifelong learning courses, my course and others that you have crafted with our faculty, it is a great list of possibilities for people who have a hunger for a different kind of world. I'm looking at the lifelong learning list of courses and possibilities: Healing Our Divide, The Faith of Frederick Douglass, The Wisdom of John Prine, and my course, The Social Role of Religion, Theologies of Salvation, Jesus versus Caesar, Recovery from Harm, Learning from the Desert Mothers. All of those people will come with a hunger. And in the process of our exchange as collegial learners together, I hope people walk away with something having met that hunger and help them know what's the menu for justice is and what the menu for love is and how that menu can be developed and fed to others in their relationship. I hope they walk away empowered to go to that next level. And it is critical. My thinking is Theology comes out of the stories of people's hunger.
Can you say more about that?
Well, if you think about the whole biblical witness and the history that we see developed out of that biblical witness, it was about a people's story and hunger to align their life with how they understood God. That's the reason why we have the stories of the Bible today. And they were stories that came out of the ground of their human selves, their mistakes, their failures, their egregious breaking of covenants and faithfulness. It's all there in the biblical witness. And they are stories that we read and realize that they are not such distant stories, but they are stories that are present with us today. Our own stories of failure, success, and God. I hope these lifelong learning courses will help people affirm and claim their story and how in their story they have come to think about God and God's reality in their life and in the world.
That idea that our theology is born from our hunger, right? It brings to mind, we often talk about thinking theologically, right, at a div school, and the idea that thinking theologically is an open-ended project, which is to say that there's always space for more hunger because you never actually get to the other side of it while we're here on earth, right?
Right. It's this hunger that continues to perpetuate a deep need for belonging and connection with all of God's creation. And if we, in this current environment, can't connect with that hunger, when I heard of 168 kindergartners and 14 teachers being killed as a result of the war in Iran, that creates a hunger for something different. That war and violence never will resolve what we need as a global community. And it so deeply impacts what really, I think, not just me and you, Nathan, but the people who will be taking these courses. What is the better alternative? What is the better alternative? We don't know exactly in terms of all of the ways in which the global world and global situations need to be resolved. We just don't know. But we do know that at the center of it, the humanity of those 168 kindergartners and the 14 teachers was not God's intention for them to have their lives cut short because of misguided war. That creates a hunger. And that's what I mean by the social role of religion, leadership and moral imagination for our times. What kind of prophetic imagination, as Walter Brueggemann would put it, that helps the church, helps communities stand on the side of peace and love and justice and opening up access to deal with poverty, to deal with famine, deal with water deserts, to deal with all the things that keep our world in a perpetual conflict and divide. I think the resources are there for us to do that, both physical, but it is the moral and spiritual and internal will of our global world that needs to strengthen. I know we got a multiple understandings of the sacred, multiple religions. We got ideologies everywhere, frames of the world. But if you think about it, at the core of it is love. At the core of it is love, as simple as Jesus put it, love of neighbor and love of self. We so botch that up all the time. It's Americanized as American essentialism. It is a threat to people in the globe, in North Korea and China and Tehran and other places or Egypt or Israel, because fear builds a platform for us not to feel that we can do that. And the history of war and the history of that fear continues to perpetuate our problem. But my commitment in these years I've taught here at Vanderbilt and at American Baptist College is that the love ethic and nonviolence, as James Lawson has taught us and Dr. King has left us the witness of, is the way. And as I'm talking to you right now, I wonder why nonviolence as it relates to racial relations here in the country would be affirmed and embraced by the country. But when it comes to war and global conflict, the same nonviolent ethic is shunned because of militarism and the power that we think that represents.
Well, Dr. Harris, I feel like we're just getting going here, but I know we have to wrap it up. I'll say just two things. One is that What I really appreciate about your lifelong learning course is what folks I hope have heard and witnessed in this conversation, which it sort of takes you on this journey from what does it look like to liberate the self to what does it look like to think socially on a global scale, right? And what I appreciate about your course is that you actually offer participants, even though it's asynchronous and online, opportunities to continually reflect on their location, on their lived experience, to ask what imagination looks like for them. And so I'm so grateful for that. The second thing that I would say is that your course offers folks an opportunity to think about applying what they're learning. And we're often accused of being in an ivory tower up here, right?
Right.
And what we want for lifelong learning is to get it out of the building, to get it into our communities. And I think for folks that engage in your course, they'll have that opportunity to think about applying those skills or that knowledge in real time.
Yeah. Yes, Nathan. I hope for that, and they should know, persons who were sharing these experiences, is that we every day, I, myself, and my colleagues here at Vanderbilt, seek to apply it to our lives. Sometimes theology, sometimes ethics in the academy can be in our heads, and we can be really able to express the theories are behind them or the proposition, but my theology or my sense of faith has to be on the ground and out there where it matters. That's in my family. That's in the relationship that I have in the community. Because I suspect, Nathan, that we are a traumatized nation at this moment. We have a lot of trauma in our people's lives, unresolved trauma, and it continues to accumulate. And we have to be sensitive pastorally about that trauma and how we offer up what we might be in ourselves in terms of love and our relationships to be healing agents for each other in conversation in these courses, and embrace people at the very level of them struggling to know who the self is as a healed self, as someone God embraces as God's own, and then continue to know that teaching like we are doing is a part of the whole fabric of life and not something separate apart from people's hunger. And that's what excites me about this lifelong learning here at Vanderbilt Divinity School. And through your leadership, we are getting ourselves out there. We're getting our stories out there. We're getting what it means to be a person and persons of faith out there as we talk about these issues.
Dr. Harris, thank you for your continued prophetic voice. Thank you for being a good neighbor. And also, I mean that spiritually. Folks, the social role of religion, leadership, and moral imagination for our times with Reverend Dr. Forrest Harris. Also, I'll just put in a quick plug. Check out the Kelly Miller Smith Institute here at Vanderbilt Divinity School that Dr. Harris directs. They're doing incredible work. Dr. Harris, Shatika Brown, it's worth getting plugged into. So, Dr. Harris, thank you for your contributions and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for letting me have this good conversation with you.
Yes, sir.